The wind came hard across the valley that night, carrying with it the smell of dust and distant rain that would never fall. Mara Holt stood on the porch of her ranch house, a Winchester rifle resting against her shoulder, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the fence line. She'd been standing there for 3 hours, waiting. She knew they were coming. The syndicate had sent word 2 weeks prior, a polite letter on expensive paper, signed by men who'd never worked a day of honest labor in their lives. The message was simple: sell or suffer the consequences. She'd burned the letter in her stove and sent back a single word carved into a fence post they'd left on her property. No. That was 5 days ago. Since then, 2 neighboring ranches had gone silent. No smoke from chimneys, no cattle sounds at dawn, just empty land and the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl. Mara was 42 years old, though the frontier had aged her in ways that didn't show in mirrors. Her hands were calloused from 15 years of working this land alone. Her face was weathered, sharp-featured, with eyes the color of storm clouds. She'd buried her husband 7 years back, a riding accident that probably wasn't an accident at all. She'd buried her father 3 years before that. Now it was just her, 300 acres of stubborn earth, and a herd of cattle that represented everything she'd ever fought for. She wasn't selling, she wasn't running, and she sure as hell wasn't dying quiet. The first sign came at midnight, a flicker of movement near the barn, barely visible in the moonless dark. Mara's finger moved to the trigger guard, her breathing steady. She'd been in tight spots before. This was just another one. Then came the voices. "She in there?" "Lights out, could be sleeping." Harmon said, "Make it quick, no witnesses, burn it after." 3 men, maybe 4. Mara's jaw tightened. They were talking like she wasn't even a threat, like this was just another job. That was their first mistake. She could have shot from the porch, could have dropped at least one before they knew what hit them. But something made her wait, some instinct honed by years of surviving in a land that killed the careless. The men moved closer, spreading out in a practiced formation. They'd done this before. Professional guns, not local thugs. The syndicate was serious this time. Mara stepped back into the house, moving silent as a ghost. She knew every board that creaked, every shadow that offered cover. She positioned herself behind the heavy oak table her father had built. The rifle trained on the front door, then everything went to hell. The door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood. 2 men burst through, guns drawn, moving fast. Mara fired once, the blast deafening in the enclosed space, and the first man went down hard, clutching his shoulder. The second man swung his pistol toward her, but before he could fire, something impossible happened. A shadow moved behind him. It was fast, faster than any man should move. And then there was a flash of steel, and the gunman made a wet, choking sound before collapsing to the floor. Standing in the doorway was a man Mara had never seen before. He was tall, lean, dressed in trail-worn clothes that had seen 1,000 miles of hard country. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of a hat, but she could see enough: sharp features, a jaw set like granite, and eyes that held absolutely no mercy. In his right hand was a knife, blood dripping from the blade. "You've got one more outside," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. "Back door." Mara didn't question it. She moved. She went through the kitchen, rifle up, and caught the third man trying to force the back entrance. She fired through the door, wood splinters and a scream, and when she yanked it open, the man was on the ground, crawling away, leaving a blood trail in the dirt. She walked up to him, rifle aimed at his head. "Who sent you?" The man was young, maybe 25, his face twisted in pain. "Please, I'm just—" "Who sent you?" "Harmon. Clay Harmon. He's with the Western Territory Syndicate. Please, don't—" Mara pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the empty valley. Silence fell like a blanket. She stood there for a long moment, the rifle still raised, her heart pounding in her chest. Then she turned and walked back inside. The stranger was standing over the bodies, cleaning his knife with a cloth he'd pulled from his pocket. He didn't look up when she entered. "You got a name?" Mara asked. "Rowan Cade?" "You always kill men in strangers' houses, Mr. Cade?" He finally looked at her, and for the first time she got a clear view of his eyes. They were gray, cold, and utterly unreadable. "Only when they're about to kill someone who doesn't deserve it." Mara studied him. Most men would have offered some explanation by now, some story about why they happened to be passing through, why they'd intervened. This man offered nothing, just stood there, waiting. Why? She asked. Why what? Why help me? Rowan slid the knife back into a sheath at his belt. Because you're not the first ranch they've hit, and you won't be the last. Something cold settled in Mara's stomach. You know about the others. I know the syndicate's been moving through this valley for 6 months, buying up land one way or another, the ones who won't sell. He gestured to the bodies on her floor. They don't tend to last long. And what's your stake in this? Rowan's expression didn't change. Let's just say the syndicate and I have unfinished business. Mara lowered her rifle slightly, though she didn't set it down. You planning on telling me what that business is? No. Then why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Rowan moved toward the door, stepping over the bodies like they were nothing more than fallen timber. But those men you just killed? They're going to be missed. Come morning, Harmon's going to send more. And next time, it won't be 3 guns. It'll be 30. Mara felt the weight of that statement settle over her. She'd known this was coming, had known since the first letter arrived, but hearing it spoken out loud made it real in a way that chilled her blood. So what do you suggest? She asked, hating that she had to ask at all. Rowan paused in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the darkness outside. I suggest you decide whether you're ready to fight a war, because that's what this is, and you can't win it alone. Then he was gone, melting into the night like smoke. Mara stood there in her blood-stained home, surrounded by corpses and the wreckage of her front door, and for the first time in 15 years she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Fear. Not of dying. She'd made peace with that possibility long ago. But fear of what came next. Fear of the choice she knew she'd have to make. Because Rowan Cade was right. This was war. Months. Dawn came cold and gray, painting the valley in shades of ash and iron. Mara had spent the night dragging bodies into the barn and cleaning blood from her floors. She didn't sleep, couldn't afford to. At first light, she saddled her horse, a tough, rangy mare named Smoke, and rode out to the ridge that overlooked the valley. From there, she could see for miles. The patchwork of ranches that dotted the landscape, the distant mountains, the thin ribbon of road that connected this isolated corner of the territory to the rest of the world. She could also see the empty ranches. The Morrison place, dark and abandoned. The Chen family's homestead, cattle scattered and fences broken. The old Garrett ranch, nothing but burned timber and ash. How many had they killed? How many had they driven out? And how had she not seen it happening? You were too busy surviving. Mara spun in her saddle. Rowan Cade sat on his horse about 20 yards away, like he'd been there the whole time. In the daylight, she got a better look at him. Mid-30s, she guessed, though it was hard to tell. He had the kind of face that could belong to a man of 25 or 50, weathered, scarred, with the distant look of someone who'd seen too much and forgotten how to look away. You always sneak up on people? Mara asked. Only when they're too distracted to notice. He rode forward, stopping beside her. See it now? See what? The pattern. Rowan pointed across the valley. Western Territory Syndicate started 6 months ago at the far end. Small ranches first, easy targets, folks who couldn't afford to fight back. They bought some out, scared others off, and the ones who refused. He let the sentence hang. Mara's hands tightened on the reins. Why? This land's barely profitable. Why go through all this trouble? Railroad. The word hit her like a physical blow. They're planning a spur line through the valley, Rowan continued, which means every acre of land between here and the mountains is about to be worth 10 times what it is now. Maybe more. The syndicate knows it. They're buying up everything they can before word gets out. How do you know all this? Rowan's expression went flat. Because I used to work for them. Mara stared at him. You were one of them. Was. And now? Now I'm the loose end they wish they'd tied up when they had the chance. There was something in the way he said it, something dark and bitter, that told Mara there was a hell of a story there. But before she could ask, movement in the valley below caught her attention. Riders, 6 of them, coming up the road toward her ranch. Harmon's men, Rowan said quietly. Right on schedule. Mara's jaw set. Let them come. They'll burn your ranch to the ground. They'll try. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, and something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. You always this stubborn? It's kept me alive this long. Stubborn gets you killed when you're outnumbered. He nodded toward the riders. But there's another way. I'm listening. The other ranchers, the ones still holding out. You unite them, you've got a fighting chance. Mara let out a bitter laugh. Those ranchers wouldn't follow me if I was holding a map out of hell. Half of them think a woman's got no business running a ranch. The other half blame me for not selling out when I had the chance. Then change their minds. How? Rowan's eyes went cold. Show them what happens when you stand alone. The riders reached Mara's ranch by mid-morning. She was waiting for them on the porch, rifle in hand, Rowan standing silent in the shadows behind her. The lead rider was a big man with a thick beard and eyes like chips of flint. He wore a deputy's badge, though everyone in the valley knew Marshal Henning was in the syndicate's pocket. Mara Holt, Henning called out, not bothering to dismount. We got reports of gunfire last night. You got anything you want to tell me? 3 men tried to kill me, Mara said flatly. They failed. Henning's expression didn't change. That's so. Where are these men now? In my barn. You're welcome to collect them. One of the other riders shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Rowan's voice cut through the tension like a knife. I wouldn't. Henning's eyes flicked to the shadows where Rowan stood. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by something that looked a lot like fear. Cade. Heard you were dead. Heard wrong. Henning's jaw worked, but he kept his composure. This doesn't concern you anymore. Everything the syndicate does concerns me. You walk away now. We'll forget we saw you. Rowan stepped out of the shadows, and Mara saw several of the riders tense. Tell Harmon I'm back. Tell him I've got a list. And tell him he's at the top of it. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Finally, Henning nodded slowly. You're making a mistake, Cade. Won't be my first. Henning turned his horse. This ranch is under investigation for murder. Nobody leaves. Nobody comes in. That's official marshal business. He looked at Mara. You've got 48 hours to get your affairs in order. After that, we're coming back, and next time, we won't be talking. They rode away, leaving a trail of dust and threats hanging in the air. Mara waited until they were out of sight before she spoke. That went well. Better than you think. Rowan turned to face her. Now Harmon knows I'm involved. He'll pull back, regroup, figure out his next move. That buys us time. Time for what? To build an army. One. That afternoon, Mara and Rowan rode out to the nearest occupied ranch, the Dalton place, 5 miles west. Old Tom Dalton had been working this land for 30 years, and he wasn't the friendly type even on good days. When Mara and Rowan rode up, they found Tom on his porch with a shotgun across his knees. Turn around, Tom called out. Don't want company. Mara dismounted. Tom, we need to talk. Nothing to talk about. Whatever trouble you brought to your doorstep, keep it there. The syndicate killed 3 men at my ranch last night. They'll be coming for you next. Tom's weathered face remained impassive. They come. I'll handle it. Alone? Against professional guns? Mara stepped closer. They've already taken the Morrison place, the Chens, the Garretts. How long do you think you'll last by yourself? Longer than I would standing with a woman who can't keep her own house in order. Rowan's voice was quiet but carried across the yard. Those men she killed last night? They were the same ones who burned the Garrett ranch. I know because I tracked them for 3 days before they hit Mara's place. Tom's eyes narrowed. And who the hell are you? Someone who knows how the syndicate operates. Someone who knows they're not going to stop until every independent rancher in this valley is gone. Rowan dismounted, moving with that same predatory grace Mara had noticed. You think you can hold them off alone? You're a fool. But you get everyone together. Pooled resources, coordinated defense. You might actually survive this. Survive? Tom let out a harsh laugh. Boy, I survived the Comanche raids of '62. Survived droughts that killed half the cattle in the territory. Survived winters that froze men solid in their beds. I don't need some drifter telling me how to survive. Those were natural enemies, Rowan said. The syndicate isn't. They're systematic. They're organized. And they're backed by more money than this entire valley is worth. You can't shoot your way out of that. Watch me. Mara stepped forward. Tom, listen to me. I know you don't like me. I know you think I should have sold out years ago, should have moved to town like a proper widow, but I didn't. Because this land means something. It meant something to my father, to my husband, and it means something to me. And if we don't stand together now, we're going to lose it all. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he spat in the dirt. Get off my land. They tried 4 more ranches that day. 4 more rejections. By the time the sun was setting, Mara was exhausted and frustrated in equal measure. They'd ridden back to her ranch in silence, the weight of failure heavy between them. They're scared, Rowan said as they unsaddled their horses. They're stupid. Same thing out here. He turned to face her. But they'll come around. Why? Because you say so? Because they don't have a choice. Rowan's voice was matter-of-fact. Right now, they think they can weather this storm alone. They're wrong. And when the syndicate hits them, when they realize how outmatched they are, they'll remember this conversation. They'll remember you came to them first, offered them a chance. And if they don't remember? If they all die before they figure it out? Rowan's expression didn't change. Then we fight with whoever's left. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the cold logic of it, but she couldn't, because deep down, she knew he was right. That night, she sat on her porch again, rifle within reach, watching the darkness. Rowan had disappeared somewhere into the shadows. She'd learned he didn't sleep like normal people, just seemed to fade in and out of existence depending on when he was needed. She thought about Tom Dalton, about the fear she'd seen hiding behind his bluster, about the other ranchers, all of them alone, all of them waiting for death to come knocking. And she thought about what Rowan had said. You can't win it alone. The truth of those words burned, because Mara Holt had spent 15 years alone. 15 years proving she didn't need anyone, didn't need help, didn't need mercy. She'd built her entire identity around being unbreakable, untamable, unwilling to bend. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe the real strength wasn't in standing alone. Maybe it was in knowing when to stop standing alone. The thought terrified her more than any gun. 3 days passed. Mara kept to her ranch, working the land like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She could feel it in the air, that electric tension before a storm breaks. Rowan spent his time scouting, watching the roads, tracking the syndicate's movements. He'd return at odd hours with updates. More riders moving into the valley, supply wagons heading toward the syndicate's main camp, hired guns arriving by the dozen. They're preparing for something big, Rowan said on the 3rd night. Not just individual raids anymore. They're mobilizing. How long do we have? A week? Maybe less. Mara nodded slowly. Then we stop waiting for them to come around. We make them listen. How? She met his eyes. The Dalton Ranch. It'll be their next target. Isolated, stubborn owner, easy to make an example of. We'll be there when they hit. They'll have numbers. So we'll be smart. Something that might have been approval flickered across Rowan's face. You have a plan? I have the beginning of one. You any good at building traps? Depends on what you're trying to catch. Men who think they're hunting prey that can't fight back. Rowan's smile was cold and sharp as broken glass. Then yeah, I'm pretty good at that. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Rowan taught Mara things she'd never learned in 15 years of ranch work. How to set tripwires that would bring down a horse. How to create kill zones where superior numbers meant nothing. How to turn familiar territory into a death trap for anyone who didn't know every inch of it. The syndicate fights like an army, Rowan explained as they worked. Organized, disciplined, overwhelming force. That's their strength, but it's also their weakness. How so? Armies need supply lines, need communication, need commanders giving orders. You disrupt any of that, they fall apart. He drove a stake into the ground, marking another tripwire position. We're not trying to beat them in a straight fight. We're trying to make them bleed, make them scared, make them question whether this valley is worth the cost. Mara understood the logic, but there was something else bothering her. "You've done this before," she said. "This isn't just theory." Rowan didn't answer for a long moment. When he did, his voice was distant. "I was a military scout, worked the frontier conflicts for 10 years, learned how to fight wars the army couldn't win with conventional tactics. And then? And then I met a man named Clay Harmon. He recruited me into the syndicate, said they needed someone with my skills to help pacify difficult territories." Rowan's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask too many questions, figured it was just business. What changed? I saw what we were doing, who we were hurting, families like yours, working land they'd bled for, and we were just taking it because we could, because it was profitable." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw real emotion in those cold eyes. "I tried to leave. Harmon made it clear that wasn't an option, so I killed 6 of his men and disappeared. And now you're back." "Now I'm back." He returned to his work. "And I'm going to finish what I started." So, the attack came on the 6th night. Mara and Rowan were positioned on a ridge overlooking the Dalton Ranch, watching, waiting. They'd warned Tom earlier that day. He told them to go to hell, but Mara had seen the fear in his eyes. He knew they were right. Just after midnight, riders appeared. 12 of them, moving quiet and purposeful through the darkness. They spread out in a practiced formation, surrounding the ranch house, cutting off escape routes. "Military discipline," Rowan murmured. "Harmon's using his best men." Mara's finger moved to her rifle trigger. "Then let's see how they handle a real fight." They'd spent 2 days rigging the approaches to the Dalton Ranch with traps. Simple, but effective. As the syndicate men moved into position, the first trap triggered. A tripwire snapped tight, yanking a rider from his saddle. The man hit the ground hard, his horse screaming and bolting. Before the others could react, a second trap went off. A deadfall that crashed down on 2 more riders, pinning them beneath heavy timber. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, horses panicked, and in the confusion, Rowan moved. He was down the ridge before Mara could blink, a shadow among shadows, and then there was gunfire. Short, precise bursts that dropped 2 more riders. Mara added her own fire from above, picking targets with the cold efficiency of someone who'd learned to shoot before she'd learned to read. Tom Dalton burst out of his ranch house, shotgun blazing, and suddenly the syndicate men found themselves caught in a crossfire they hadn't expected. It was over in 3 minutes. 4 syndicate men dead, 3 wounded, the rest retreating in disarray, leaving their fallen behind. Silence settled over the ranch like a shroud. Tom stood in his yard, shotgun still raised, staring at the carnage. Slowly he turned to look up at the ridge where Mara had been firing from. She rode down, Rowan materializing beside her like a ghost. Tom looked between them, his weathered face unreadable. Then he lowered his shotgun. "Reckon I owe you," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything," Mara replied. "But we need to talk. All of us. Because this was just the beginning." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll send word to the others. We meet at your place tomorrow, noon." "They'll come?" "They'll come." Tom's expression was grim. "Because if tonight taught me anything, it's that you were right. We can't win this alone." By noon the next day, Mara's ranch was more crowded than it had been in 15 years. 11 ranchers showed up, everyone who was left in the valley. They came wary, distrustful, but they came. Tom Dalton had spread the word about the attack, about how Mara and Rowan had saved his life. Word traveled fast in desperate times. They gathered in Mara's barn, standing in a rough circle, weathered faces and hard eyes studying each other. These were people who'd spent years as neighbors but never friends, divided by pride and competition and the simple fact that frontier life didn't leave much room for community. Mara stood before them, feeling the weight of their attention, their doubt, their fear. "I'm going to make this simple," she began. "The Western Territory Syndicate wants this valley. They've already taken 5 ranches. They'll take the rest unless we stop them. And how exactly do we stop an organization backed by railroad money?" This from Sarah Chen, a tough-as-nails widow who'd been running her family's ranch since her husband disappeared 6 months back. "We make it cost more than it's worth," Rowan said, stepping forward. "The syndicate operates on profit margins. They've budgeted a certain amount for acquiring this land. We make sure they exceed that budget. In blood, in money, in time. You're talking about war, another rancher said. Jacob Reeves, young, maybe 28, with the kind of idealism that hadn't been beaten out of him yet. We're already in a war, Mara countered. The only question is whether we fight it together or die separately. Silence. Then Tom Dalton spoke up. I've known most of you for years. Some of you I like, some I don't. But here's the truth. Mara's right. We stand together or we fall alone. I'm done falling. One by one, heads nodded. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was agreement, and that was enough. All right, Mara said. Then here's what we do. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Rowan transformed the ranchers from individuals into a unit. He was merciless in his training, waking them before dawn, drilling them on tactics, teaching them to move as one, to think like soldiers instead of farmers. Your strength isn't an individual skill, he told them during one grueling session. It's in discipline, in knowing that when things go to hell, the person next to you will hold the line. Some of them hated him for it, thought he was too harsh, too demanding, but they learned. They learned how to set ambushes, how to read terrain for tactical advantage, how to conserve ammunition, how to kill efficiently. Mara worked alongside them, refusing any special treatment. If anything, she pushed herself harder than anyone else, knowing they were watching, judging, waiting for her to fail. She didn't fail. And slowly, grudgingly, respect began to build. But it came at a cost. 1 week into training, the syndicate struck back. They hit the Morrison Ranch, still abandoned, but valuable as a symbol, burned it to the ground and left a message carved into a fence post. Anyone who stands with Rowan Cade dies first. The ranchers saw it, saw what they were up against. 3 of them wanted to quit right there. Mara gathered everyone that night around a fire, the message still burning in their minds. I know you're scared, she said. I'm scared too. But fear's only useful if it makes you smarter, not weaker. The syndicate wants us to break, wants us to turn on each other, blame each other, run away. That's how they win. They've got an army, Sarah Chen said quietly. We've got 11 people. 12, Rowan corrected. And I've seen smaller groups hold impossible positions. Seen 5 men hold off 50 because they refused to break. Those men die? Jacob Reeves asked. Some of them. But they took enough of the enemy with them that the attack failed. Sometimes that's all victory is, making the other side pay too much for what they want. It was a cold comfort, but it was honest. And these were people who respected honesty. We stay, Tom Dalton said finally. We train, we fight, and if we die on our feet. The others murmured agreement, all except one. Daniel Cross was a younger rancher, maybe 30, who'd inherited his land from an uncle. He stood up, face pale. I can't do this. I'm sorry, Mara, but I've got a wife, 2 kids. I can't risk them for this. Mara wanted to be angry, wanted to call him a coward, but she understood. Go, she said quietly. No judgment. Family comes first. Daniel nodded, relief flooding his face. He left that night. 2 days later, the syndicate burned his ranch anyway, killed his wife, took his children. The message was clear. There was no neutral ground, no safe choice, no escape. When word reached the remaining ranchers, something changed. The fear that had been holding them back transformed into something else. Rage. Cold, focused, deadly rage. Now they understand, Rowan said quietly to Mara as they watched the ranchers train with renewed intensity. Now they're ready. Ready for what? Rowan's eyes were distant, calculating. To become exactly what the syndicate fears most, which is people with nothing left to lose. The bodies in Mara's barn drew flies by morning. She'd covered them with canvas, but death had a smell that no amount of fabric could hide. Standing in the doorway with her coffee growing cold in her hands, she studied the 3 men she'd killed and felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just the hollow acknowledgement that this was what survival looked like now. Rowan appeared beside her without warning, moving silent as always in the pre-dawn light. He'd been gone since their conversation the previous evening, but now he was back, his clothes dusty from hard riding. Henning's pulling his men back to town, he said without preamble. Harmon's consolidating at the main camp. They're regrouping, trying to figure out their next move. How long do we have? Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. Rowan studied the covered bodies. You bury them yet? Was planning to burn them. Easier than digging graves for men who tried to kill me. Burn them and you send a message. Bury them and you show you're better than they are. He looked at her. Which message do you want to send? Mara hadn't thought about it that way. She'd just been focused on disposal, on removing the evidence of violence from her home. But Rowan was right. Everything they did now would be watched, judged, interpreted by the people they needed to convince. Help me dig, she said. They spent the morning excavating 3 graves on the far edge of her property, where the land sloped down toward a creek that ran year-round. It was hard work made harder by the August heat, and by noon both of them were soaked with sweat and streaked with dirt. But the graves were deep enough, and the bodies went into them without ceremony or words. As Mara patted down the last shovelful of earth, she saw dust rising on the road. Riders approaching. Her hand went instinctively to her rifle, but Rowan shook his head. It's Tom Dalton, and he's not alone. Tom rode up with 3 other ranchers in tow, Sarah Chen, Marcus Webb, and a younger man Mara recognized as Jacob Reeves. They all looked wary, sitting their horses like they were ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Heard you had some excitement, Tom said, his eyes taking in the fresh graves, the bullet-scarred walls of Mara's house. Nothing I couldn't handle. That's what worries me. Tom dismounted slowly, his joints creaking with age. Word spreading about what happened here, about Rowan Cade showing up, about you killing syndicate men. They came to kill me first. I know, and part of me respects that you stood your ground, but the other part knows what's coming next. Tom looked at the other ranchers. We've been talking, all night actually, arguing mostly, but we came to a decision. Mara braced herself for rejection, for the speech about how they couldn't risk getting involved, how they had their own families to think about. But Tom surprised her. We're in, all of us. Whatever fight's coming, we'll face it together. For a moment, Mara couldn't speak. She'd spent so many years alone, so many years being told she was too stubborn, too difficult, too unwilling to bend. And now these people who'd barely spoken to her in years, were offering to stand beside her. You understand what that means? Rowan asked, stepping forward. The syndicate won't see this as just Mara's fight anymore. They'll come after all of you, your families, your land, everything you've built. We know, Sarah Chen said, her voice steady despite the fear Mara could see in her eyes. But Tom showed us what you showed him, the pattern, the evidence that they're coming for all of us anyway. At least this way, we're not waiting for the knife. Marcus Webb spat in the dust. Besides, I'm tired of being scared, tired of watching my neighbors disappear and pretending it's not my problem. My father didn't build this ranch so I could surrender it to thieves. And I'm just tired of running, Jacob Reeves added. He was young, maybe 28, with the kind of idealism that the frontier usually crushed within a few years. I came out here to build something. Time I actually fought for it. Mara looked at each of them, seeing the fear they were trying to hide, the courage they were forcing themselves to display. They weren't soldiers. They were farmers and ranchers who probably hadn't fired a gun in anger in their lives. But they were here. All right, she said, then we start training today, because when the syndicate comes, and they will come, we need to be ready. The next week transformed Mara's ranch into something between a military camp and a fortress. Rowan took charge of the training with an intensity that bordered on ruthless. He woke them before dawn, ran them through drills until their hands bled, and pushed them past exhaustion into the place where instinct took over from thought. You're not fighting for glory, he told them on the 3rd day, after Marcus had collapsed from exhaustion. You're fighting to survive, which means you need to be meaner, smarter, and more willing to do whatever it takes than the men trying to kill you. He taught them how to move in the dark, how to read terrain for tactical advantage, how to set ambushes and coordinate fire. But more than that, he taught them how to think like soldiers instead of civilians. The syndicate's strength is in their organization, Rowan explained, drawing diagrams in the dirt with a stick. They move like an army because most of them were army. They understand command structure, coordinated assaults, overwhelming force. You can't beat that by fighting the same way. So how do we beat it? Jacob asked, studying the diagrams with intense focus. You make them fight your fight instead of theirs. You use the land. You hit and fade. You make them chase ghosts while you pick them apart piece by piece. Rowan looked up at the assembled group. And most important, you never ever let them isolate you. The moment one of you is alone, you're dead. You stay together, watch each other's backs, and make them pay in blood for every inch of ground. The training was brutal, but it was working. Mara could see the change in her people, the way they moved with more confidence, the way they started thinking tactically instead of reactively. Sarah Chen, who'd been terrified during the first drill, now moved through the exercises with grim determination. Marcus Webb, despite his initial collapse, pushed himself harder than anyone. Even Tom Dalton, at 63 years old, kept pace with the younger ranchers through sheer stubborn will. But the real transformation was in how they related to each other. The suspicions and rivalries that had kept them separated for years began to dissolve under shared hardship. They ate together, trained together, and gradually started to trust each other in ways that went deeper than neighborly courtesy. On the fifth night, as they sat around a fire eating a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Jacob Reeves spoke up. "I've been thinking about something," Rowan said. "About never being alone." He looked around the circle of firelit faces. "My whole life out here, I've been taught that strength means handling your own problems, that asking for help is weakness. But that's what the syndicate counts on, isn't it? That we'll stay divided because we're too proud to admit we need each other." "Pride's a luxury," Tom said, his voice rough. "Can't afford luxuries when you're fighting for your life." "It's more than that," Sarah added. She'd been quiet most of the evening, but now her words carried weight. "I've been alone since my husband disappeared, told myself it was better that way, safer not to depend on anyone. But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared of losing someone again, scared of caring." She looked directly at Mara. "You were right to push for this. All of us together, because alone, we were already dead. We just didn't know it yet." Mara felt something shift in the group, some invisible barrier finally breaking down. These weren't just neighbors anymore, or even reluctant allies. They were becoming something more cohesive, more dangerous to the syndicate's plans. They were becoming a unit. Rowan must have sensed it too, because he stood up, his expression serious. "Tomorrow, we start advanced tactics. Setting traps, coordinating ambushes, defensive positions. It's going to be harder than anything we've done so far. Some of you might get hurt, but you need to be ready because the time we have left is running out." "How do you know?" Marcus asked. "Because I scouted their camp last night. They're bringing in reinforcements, experienced guns from operations in other territories. Harmon's assembling an overwhelming force, and when he moves, it's going to be decisive." Rowan's eyes were cold in the firelight. "We've got maybe 3 days before they hit us. Probably less." The group fell silent, the weight of that knowledge settling over them. 3 days to prepare for a battle they were almost certainly going to lose. 3 days to get right with whatever peace they could find. "Then we make the most of those 3 days," Mara said, standing to face them all. "We train like our lives depend on it, because they do. We set up our defenses, we prepare fallback positions, and we make damn sure that when the syndicate comes, they'll remember this valley for the rest of their lives." "However long that is," Tom added with dark humor. "However long that is." The next 2 days blurred together in a haze of preparation and training. They fortified positions, cached supplies and ammunition, mapped out defensive lines and escape routes. Rowan pushed them relentlessly, but now they understood why. Every drill, every exercise, every seemingly pointless repetition was building muscle memory that might save their lives when chaos erupted. On the morning of the second day, a rider approached Mara's ranch flying a white flag. Rowan nearly shot him anyway, but Mara held up her hand. "Let's hear what they have to say." The rider was young, barely 20, and clearly terrified. He handed over a sealed letter addressed to Mara, then fled before anyone could question him. Mara broke the seal and read the contents, her expression darkening with each word. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "An ultimatum from Harmon." Well, Mara read aloud. "You have 48 hours to surrender your property and leave the territory. Anyone found in the valley after that deadline will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. The Western Territory Syndicate has legal claim to all lands in the valley based on unpaid tax liens and territorial development rights. Resistance is both futile and illegal. Legal claim? Jacob's voice was incredulous. Based on what? Based on lies and forged documents, Rowan said. The syndicate's been manufacturing legal justification for months, creating fake tax records, bribing assessors, using every corrupt official in their pocket to build a paper trail that looks legitimate. Can they actually do that? Marcus asked. They already have. To a territorial court, their claim looks solid, which means when they come to enforce it, they'll have the law on their side, or at least the appearance of it. Mara crumpled the letter and threw it into the fire they'd built for cooking. Doesn't matter what papers they have. This land is ours. We've bled for it, buried family in it, built our lives on it. Some corrupt official in a distant capital doesn't change that. So we fight, Tom said. It wasn't a question. We fight. That evening, as the sun set on what might be their last day of peace, Mara found herself alone on her porch again. She'd sent the others back to their ranches to make final preparations, to say whatever goodbyes they needed to say to family members who were being evacuated to safety in town. Rowan joined her as the stars began to appear, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one and she took it gratefully, savoring the bitter warmth. You should leave, he said quietly. Not this again. I'm serious, you've done enough. You brought everyone together, gave them a fighting chance, but you don't have to die here. Neither do you. I'm already dead. Have been since I walked away from the syndicate. This is just finishing what I started. He turned to face her. But you could have a life after this. Could rebuild somewhere else, start over. You're only 42, that's young enough to what? Run? Hide? Spend the rest of my life knowing I abandoned my home and the people I convinced to stand with me? Mara shook her head. That's not a life. That's just a slower kind of death. Stubborn. You already knew that about me. They drank their coffee in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the valley, crickets, a distant owl, wind moving through grass. Peaceful sounds that would soon be drowned out by gunfire and screaming. Tell me something, Mara said eventually. When this is over, assuming any of us survive, what then? What do you do with the rest of your life? Rowan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, I don't know. Never thought that far ahead. Always figured I'd die in a fight somewhere, and that would be the end of it. That's a lonely way to live. It's the only way I know. He looked at her, and in the starlight his face seemed younger, more vulnerable. But lately I've been wondering what it would be like, to have something worth surviving for instead of just something worth dying for. And have you figured it out? Getting there. Turns out it might involve a stubborn rancher with a talent for getting herself into impossible situations. Despite everything, despite the coming battle, despite the fear churning in her gut, Mara smiled. She sounds like trouble. The worst kind. And you're interested anyway? Apparently I have terrible judgment. But he was smiling too, that rare expression that transformed his face from cold and calculating to something almost human. Mara set down her coffee and moved closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth of his body in the cooling night air. If we survive this, when we survive this. When we survive this, she corrected, I think we should figure out what comes next, together. Rowan's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers rough and calloused and warm. I'd like that. They stood there holding hands like awkward teenagers, 2 people who'd spent so long being hard and isolated that they'd almost forgotten how to be anything else. But they were learning, and maybe that was enough. The next morning arrived too soon and too cold. Frost covered the ground despite it being late summer, and the air had that sharp quality that spoke of change coming. Mara woke before dawn and found Rowan already up, checking weapons and supplies with mechanical precision. Today's the day, he said without looking up. Henning's men were spotted moving out of town before midnight. Harmon's main force left their camp at dawn. They're converging on the valley from 3 directions. How many? Best estimate? 45 to 50 men, all armed, most with military experience. They're bringing supply wagons, which means they're planning for sustained operations. He finally looked up at her. This is their final push. They're not planning on leaving anyone alive to resist. Mara felt ice settle in her stomach, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Then we make them regret ever coming here. Round everyone up. Time to take our positions. Within an hour, the ranchers had assembled at Mara's property for final instructions. They looked different now than they had a week ago. Harder, more focused, wearing their weapons like they understood what they were for. The transformation from farmers to fighters wasn't complete, but it had begun. You all know the plan, Rowan said, addressing the group. We let them commit to the pass, then hit them from both sides. The goal isn't to win a pitched battle, we can't. The goal is to make them bleed, to slow them down, to make them question whether this valley is worth the cost. And when they break through, Sarah asked, because they will break through eventually. Then we fall back to secondary positions. We make them fight for every ranch, every building, every foot of ground. We turn their organized campaign into a dozen separate battles they can't coordinate. Rowan's expression was grim. Some of us won't survive that. That's just the truth. But the ones who do will have bought time for the rest of the valley to prepare, to get word out, to bring in help. Is help actually coming? Jacob's voice was quiet, but the question hung heavy. I sent riders to the territorial capital 3 days ago, Mara said, carrying evidence of the syndicate's operations, witness statements, everything we could gather. If they make it through, if the right people see what we've sent, help will come. But we can't count on it arriving in time. So we fight like we're alone, Marcus said. We fight like we're alone, Mara confirmed. But we fight together. The group dispersed to their assigned positions, each person carrying the weight of what was coming. Mara watched them go. These people who'd become more than neighbors, more than allies. They'd become something like family, bound together by shared purpose and shared fear. You gave them hope, Rowan said, standing beside her. More than that, you gave them something to fight for beyond just survival. That's rare. Hope doesn't stop bullets. No. But it makes people stand when they'd otherwise run, and sometimes that's the difference. They took up their own positions overlooking the valley, watching the roads for the dust clouds that would signal the syndicate's approach. The wait was agonizing, every minute stretched thin with tension, but they held their discipline, watched, waited. And then, just before noon, they came. The syndicate force appeared on the horizon like a dark stain spreading across the land. Even at a distance, Mara could see the organization in their movement, the military precision that spoke of professional leadership. These weren't thugs or hired guns anymore. This was an army. Bigger than we thought, Rowan muttered, studying them through a spyglass. I count at least 50 men, maybe more. And they've got artillery. Artillery? Small field pieces, probably mountain howitzers. Nothing that could level a fortress, but more than enough to demolish ranch buildings. He lowered the glass, his expression dark. Harmon's not taking chances this time. He's planning to obliterate any resistance. Mara's hands tightened on her rifle. They'd known this would be bad, but seeing the full force arrayed against them made it real in a way that planning and preparation hadn't. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had every advantage except one. They knew this land, and they had nothing left to lose. The syndicate force moved with deliberate speed toward Widow's Pass, exactly as Rowan had predicted. They were confident, assured, moving like conquerors entering territory they already owned. That confidence would be their first mistake. Mara signaled to her people, and they melted into their positions, invisible among the rocks and scrub. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for the enemy to step into it. As the first syndicate riders entered the pass, Mara felt time slow down. This was the moment. Everything they'd trained for, everything they'd prepared, came down to the next few minutes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her mouth was dry, but her hands were steady on her rifle. She could hear Rowan's voice in her memory from the training sessions. Fear is good. Fear keeps you sharp, but don't let it control you. When the moment comes, you breathe through it and you do what needs to be done. The syndicate column moved deeper into the pass, their formation tight and professional. Mara counted silently, waiting for the signal, waiting for the perfect moment when they were committed and vulnerable. Rowan's flare arced into the sky, and the valley erupted into war. The syndicate's retaliation for Daniel Cross's family came swift and merciless. But what they hadn't counted on was the response it would trigger. The remaining ranchers didn't scatter in fear. They hardened. Every dawn found them training harder, every dusk found them fortifying their positions, and every night found them planning with a precision that would have impressed actual military commanders. Rowan stood before them on the fourth week, the morning sun casting long shadows across Mara's ranch yard where they'd gathered. 11 faces looked back at him, weathered, determined, and carrying the weight of what they'd all lost. "The syndicate's going to come at us with everything they have," Rowan said, his voice cutting through the cold air. "They've been consolidating forces at their main camp outside Blackwater Ridge. My count puts them at 47 armed men, plus another dozen support staff. They've got supplies for a sustained campaign, and they're not planning on leaving until this valley belongs to them." 47 against 11, Saracen said. Her voice was steady, but Mara could see the calculation in her eyes. "Those aren't fighting odds. They are if you make them fight on your terms." Rowan pulled out a hand-drawn map and spread it across a barrel. "The valley has 3 main approaches. We can't defend all of them simultaneously with our numbers, so we don't try. We force them to come at us where we want them." Tom Dalton leaned over the map, studying it with the eye of someone who'd known this land for 3 decades. "You're talking about Widow's Pass. It's the only route that makes sense for moving heavy equipment and large numbers. The other approaches are too narrow, too exposed. If they want to hit us all at once, and they will because that's how Harmon thinks, they'll come through there." "It's also a natural kill zone," Jacob Reeves added, understanding dawning on his face. "High ridges on both sides, narrow floor, limited visibility." Rowan nodded. "We turn your ranches into fortified positions, connected by runners and signal fires. When they move through the pass, we hit them from above. Not to win a direct engagement. We can't. But to bleed them, slow them, make them question every step forward." "And then what?" This from Marcus Webb, a grizzled rancher who'd barely spoken during the entire training period. "They'll still have numbers on us. They'll still be able to overrun any position we hold." "That's why we don't hold," Mara said, stepping forward. She'd been going over this plan with Rowan for days, refining it, looking for holes. "We hit and move. Use the terrain. Make them chase shadows, while we pick them apart piece by piece." "Guerrilla tactics," Sarah said quietly. "That's what you're describing." "It's the only tactic that works when you're outnumbered 4-1, Rowan replied. "The syndicate's strength is in their organization, their discipline, their resources. But every one of those becomes a weakness if we can disrupt them, make them paranoid, make them waste ammunition on ghosts, make them so focused on finding us that they can't coordinate their real assault." The ranchers exchanged glances. This was beyond anything they'd imagined when they'd agreed to stand together. This wasn't just defending their land, this was becoming something else entirely. "How long do we have?" Tom asked. 3 days? Maybe 4. Rowan rolled up the map. "They're waiting on a final shipment of ammunition and supplies. Once that arrives, they'll move. We need to be ready before then." The group dispersed to their assignments, each rancher heading back to their property with specific instructions. Fortify key positions. Cache supplies and ammunition. Prepare fallback routes. Transform their homes into tactical positions that could be defended and abandoned as needed. Mara and Rowan stayed behind, watching them go. "You think they're ready?" Mara asked. "No." Rowan's answer was blunt. "But they're as ready as they're going to get. The real question is whether they'll hold when the shooting starts. Training's one thing. Actually standing your ground when bullets are flying and people are dying, that's something else entirely." "They'll hold." "You sound certain." "I am." Mara turned to face him. "They've all lost too much to run now. The syndicate made sure of that when they killed Daniel's family. These people aren't fighting for land anymore. They're fighting because there's nothing left to do but fight." Rowan studied her for a long moment. "And you? What are you fighting for?" The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on the tactical aspects, on keeping everyone together, on survival, that she hadn't stopped to examine her own motivations. "Same thing I've always fought for," she said finally. "The right to stand on my own ground and tell the world to go to hell if it doesn't like it." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Rowan's face. "Stubborn to the end. Worked so far. Until it doesn't." He moved toward his horse. I'm going to scout the syndicate's camp tonight. See if I can get a better count on their numbers. Maybe cause some confusion. Alone? It's what I do best. Mara wanted to argue, but she'd learned over the past weeks that Rowan operated on his own rules. He'd disappear for hours or days, then return with intelligence that always proved accurate. She didn't know how he moved so quietly, how he got so close to enemy positions without being detected, but she'd stopped questioning it. Be careful, she said, immediately regretting how it sounded. Like she cared. Like his survival mattered beyond his tactical value. Rowan paused, looking back at her. You worried about me, Mara Holt. I'm worried about losing our best strategist right before a major engagement. Sure. That almost smile again. That's what you're worried about. Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone in the yard with too many thoughts and not enough time to examine them. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Mara moved between the ranches, checking fortifications, coordinating supply caches, ensuring everyone understood the plan. It was exhausting work, made harder by the constant tension of waiting for an attack that could come at any moment. On the second night, she found Sarah Chen sitting on her porch, rifle across her lap, staring out into the darkness. Can't sleep either? Mara asked, climbing the steps. Sarah shook her head. Keep thinking about my husband. About the night he disappeared. I told myself it was an accident, that he'd fallen, gotten lost, something natural. But I knew. Deep down, I knew the syndicate had taken him because he wouldn't sell. I'm sorry. Don't be. Sarah's voice was hard. Sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't bring him back. But making those bastards pay? That might mean something. Mara sat down beside her. You scared? Terrified. You? Out of my mind. They sat in silence for a while. Two women who'd spent years being strong because they had no other choice, finally admitting the fear they'd been carrying. You think we can actually do this? Sarah asked eventually. Win, I mean. Really win. Mara considered the question carefully. I think we can make them wish they'd never come to this valley. Whether that counts as winning depends on how you measure it. Good enough for me. The conversation drifted to other things, memories of better times, stories about their families, the kind of talk that only happens between people who might not see another sunrise. When Mara finally left, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not alone. Rowan returned on the third morning, looking like he'd been through hell. His clothes were torn, there was dried blood on his shirt that probably wasn't his, and he moved with the careful precision of someone nursing injuries. What happened? Mara demanded, meeting him at the edge of her property. Got careless. One of their sentries spotted me. He dismounted stiffly. But I got what we needed. They're moving out tomorrow at dawn. Full force, straight through Widow's Pass like we predicted. You're hurt. I'm functional. That's what matters. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. Managed to grab this from Harmon's tent. Their complete attack plan. Mara unfolded it, scanning the detailed diagrams and notes. Her blood ran cold as she understood what she was seeing. They're not just planning to take the ranches, she said slowly. They're planning to wipe us out completely. No survivors, no witnesses. Harmon's learned his lesson from the resistance we've shown. He's not taking chances anymore. Rowan pointed to a section of the map. See here? They've marked every ranch as a target for complete destruction. They're going to sweep through, kill everyone, burn everything, and claim we all fled or sold out voluntarily. Can we stop this? We can try. Rowan's expression was grim. But it's going to be bloody. Bloodier than anything we've prepared for. Mara looked at the map, at the careful notations marking where her friends and neighbors would die if this plan succeeded. Then she looked at Rowan, really looked at him, and saw something she'd been too focused to notice before. You don't expect to survive this, do you? He met her eyes, and for once, his guard dropped completely. I stopped expecting to survive anything a long time ago. This is just another fight. Maybe the last one. But as long as I take Harmon with me, it'll have been worth it. That's not good enough. It's all I've got. Mara stepped closer, her voice dropping. You've spent weeks training these people, giving them hope, making them believe they can win. You don't get to give up now. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. No, you're being a coward. The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. You're planning your death because it's easier than planning your life. Because if you survive this, you'll have to figure out what comes next, and that scares you more than dying ever could. Rowan's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know you're the best tactical mind I've ever seen. I know you're loyal to people you barely know. I know you've saved my life twice and probably saved this entire valley by being here. And I know you're planning to throw all of that away because you think dying for a cause is noble. What would you have me do? Survive. Win. Help us build something worth keeping after all this is over. Mara held his gaze. The valley needs you. These people need you. What about you? The question was quiet, almost vulnerable. Do you need me? It would have been easy to deflect, to turn it into something tactical and safe. But Mara was tired of safe, tired of keeping everyone at arm's length, tired of being alone even when surrounded by people. Yes, she said simply, I need you alive. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, an acknowledgement of something neither of them had words for. Then Rowan nodded slowly. Then I'll do my best to survive. That's all I'm asking. They spent the rest of the day finalizing preparations, sending runners to each ranch with final instructions and the intelligence from Harmon's attack plan. As the sun began to set, the ranchers gathered one last time at Mara's property. The mood was somber but determined. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone had made their peace with it. Tomorrow, we make our stand, Mara said, standing before them. Not because we want to, not because we're heroes, but because we're out of choices and out of time. The syndicate thinks they can sweep through this valley and erase us like we never existed. They're wrong. We hit them in the pass at dawn, Rowan continued, pointing to positions on the map they'd all memorized. Sarah and Marcus take the North Ridge. Tom and Jacob hold the South. The rest spread according to your assignments. Remember your training. Remember your fallback positions. And remember that you're not alone up there. Every one of you has someone watching their back. What about you two? Tom asked. Where will you be? Mara and Rowan exchanged a glance. We'll be wherever we're needed most, Mara said. Mobile command. We'll move between positions, coordinate the defense, and make sure everyone stays connected. And when they break through? Marcus asked. Because they will break through eventually. Then we fall back to secondary positions, Rowan answered. The ranches themselves. We make them fight for every inch, every building, every fence post. We turn their organized assault into a dozen separate battles they can't coordinate. And we make damn sure that when this is over, they'll think twice before trying this anywhere else. The ranchers nodded, grim understanding settling over them. Get some rest, Mara said. Tomorrow's going to be the longest day of your lives. They dispersed into the darkness, heading to their final positions. Mara watched them go, wondering how many she'd see alive again. You gave them hope, Rowan said quietly beside her. That's more than most leaders manage before a battle. Hope doesn't stop bullets. No, but it makes people fight harder, fight smarter, and sometimes that's the difference between losing and surviving long enough to win. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She sat on her porch, rifle in her lap, watching the stars wheel overhead. Sometime around midnight, Rowan joined her, moving silent as always. You should rest, he said. So should you. Never been good at it. He sat down beside her and they shared the silence for a while. Then, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. What? You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I've met a lot of people worth knowing. He looked at her, and in the starlight, his face seemed younger, less haunted. This valley's lucky to have you. Hell, I'm lucky to have met you. Mara felt something tight in her chest loosen. Don't get sentimental on me now, Cade. I need you cold and tactical tomorrow. I can be both. Can you? For you? I'll try. Dawn came too fast and too slow at the same time. Mara and Rowan rode out to Widow's Pass in the pre-dawn darkness, their horses picking their way carefully through terrain they knew by heart. Other shapes moved in the shadows, the ranchers taking their positions, silent and determined. The pass was exactly as deadly as Rowan had described. High ridges on both sides created a natural corridor about 50 yards wide and 300 yards long. Anyone moving through it would be completely exposed to fire from above. The syndicate would know it was a trap, but they'd have no choice but to go through it if they wanted to reach the ranches beyond. Mara took up position on the north ridge, finding the spot she and Rowan had scouted days before. From here, she could see the entire length of the pass and coordinate the defense. Rowan positioned himself on the south ridge with a similar vantage point. They waited. The sun crept over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and red, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Then, in the distance, dust. "They're coming," Sarah's voice drifted across from her position. "I count at least 30 riders, maybe more behind them." Mara's heart hammered in her chest, but her hands were steady on her rifle. This was it. Everything they'd prepared for, everything they'd fought for, came down to the next few hours. The syndicate force moved into view, and Mara's breath caught. Rowan's count had been conservative. She could see at least 50 armed men moving in a tight military formation. They had supply wagons, spare horses, and enough firepower to level a small town. At the head of the column rode a man Mara recognized from Rowan's descriptions. Clay Harmon, tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of a career military officer. He sat his horse like he owned the world, confident and utterly without fear. The column approached the pass, and Mara could see Harmon studying the ridges. He knew what he was riding into. But his expression never changed. He simply raised his hand, signaling his men to continue. Arrogance or confidence? Mara couldn't tell. Maybe both. The first riders entered the pass. Mara waited, counting silently. Let them commit. Let them think they were safe. Halfway through, 3/4. Almost the entire column was in the kill zone now. Rowan's signal flare arced into the sky, burning red against the morning blue, and hell erupted. The ranchers opened fire from both ridges simultaneously, a devastating crossfire that tore into the syndicate column. Men screamed, horses panicked, and the carefully organized formation dissolved into chaos in seconds. But Harmon was already shouting orders, his voice cutting through the confusion. "Return fire! Up the ridges! Flank positions, move!" The syndicate men responded with professional discipline, taking cover behind wagons and dead horses, laying down suppressing fire toward the ridges. Some broke off and started climbing toward the rancher positions, using the terrain for cover. "They're adapting faster than expected," Tom's voice carried across the pass. "We need to fall back." "Hold position," Rowan's command was sharp. "Pour it on. Don't let them organize." Mara fired methodically, picking targets, making every shot count. She'd already dropped 3 men, but there were so many more. For every one that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. Then she saw movement on her flank. Syndicate men had found a route up the ridge, were moving to flank Sarah's position. "Sarah, you've got company coming up on your left," Mara shouted, swinging her rifle around. She fired, dropping the lead climber, but there were at least 5 more behind him. Sarah shifted, engaging the new threat, but now she was exposed to fire from the pass below. Bullets kicked up dust around her position. Rowan was already moving, scrambling along the ridge with inhuman speed, his rifle barking in steady rhythm. He reached Sarah's position just as the flanking force closed in, and Mara watched in awe as he became something other than human, a whirlwind of violence and precision, dropping men with a combination of rifle fire and close-quarters combat that was brutal and efficient. But the syndicate wasn't breaking. They were too well-trained, too numerous, too determined. And Harmon was coordinating them with the skill of someone who'd fought 100 battles. "Fall back to secondary positions," Mara ordered, recognizing the signs. They'd done damage, maybe a third of the syndicate force was dead or wounded, but they couldn't hold the pass. "Everyone move, now!" The ranchers began their retreat, a fighting withdrawal that Rowan had drilled into them over weeks of training. Move, cover, move again. Never turn your back, never stop watching your flanks. Mara was the last off the north ridge, providing covering fire as her people pulled back. She could see the syndicate forces reorganizing, preparing to pursue. Harmon sat his horse in the center of the carnage, studying the ridges, and even at this distance, Mara felt his eyes find her. He knew who she was, knew she was the leader, and she could see the calculation in his posture. This wasn't over. Not even close. She turned and ran, following her people toward the next defensive line, her mind already racing ahead to the next stage of the battle. They'd bloodied the syndicate, slowed them down, but the real test was still coming. Because now the syndicate knew what they were facing, knew the ranchers could fight, knew this wouldn't be the easy sweep they'd planned. And men like Harmon didn't accept failure well. The war for the valley had truly begun. The retreat from Widow's Pass turned into a running battle that stretched across 3 miles of brutal terrain. Mara led her group through gullies and over ridges they'd mapped during training, always staying just ahead of the syndicate pursuit. Behind them, gunfire echoed like thunder, punctuated by screams and the crash of falling rocks as both sides used every advantage the land offered. They reached the first fallback position, Sarah Chen's ranch, just as the sun hit its zenith. The buildings had been fortified over the past week, windows barricaded, firing positions prepared, escape routes marked. It wasn't a fortress, but it would slow the syndicate down. "Everyone inside," Mara shouted as her people scrambled for cover. "Take your positions! They'll be on us in minutes!" Sarah was already at her assigned window, rifle ready, her face a mask of grim determination. Tom Dalton positioned himself on the second floor with a clear view of the approach. Jacob Reeves and Marcus Webb took the barn, which offered excellent sightlines to the flanks. Rowan appeared beside Mara, breathing hard but still moving with that predatory efficiency. Blood streaked his face from a graze across his temple, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "We hurt them in the pass," he said, checking his ammunition. "Maybe 15 dead, another 10 wounded. But Harmon's regrouping faster than I expected. He's good." "How good?" "Good enough to have served under General Sheridan during the war. Good enough to have commanded frontier garrisons against Sioux war parties." Rowan's expression was dark. "He's not just a hired gun. He's a legitimate tactician, and now he's angry." As if summoned by the mention of his name, the syndicate force appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Mara counted heads, at least 30 men still mounted and ready, with more coming up behind. They'd lost ground, but they still had overwhelming numbers. Harmon sat his horse at the front, studying the fortified ranch with the calm assessment of a chess player examining the board. Even at this distance, Mara could feel the weight of his attention, the cold calculation behind those eyes. Then he raised his hand and made a simple gesture. The world exploded. The syndicate didn't charge blindly. Instead, they unleashed a devastating barrage of covering fire while split forces moved to flank the ranch from both sides. It was textbook military assault: pin the enemy in place, envelope their position, eliminate escape routes. "North flank!" Tom's voice rang out from upstairs. "They're moving around." "South too," Marcus called from the barn. "At least 8 men." Mara's mind raced. They'd anticipated this, had planned for it, but experiencing it was different from imagining it. The sheer volume of fire being poured into the ranch was staggering. Windows shattered, wood splintered, and the air filled with the scream of ricocheting bullets. "Hold fire until they're in effective range," Rowan commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't waste ammunition." The syndicate men advanced with professional discipline, using cover, moving in coordinated bounds. They'd done this before, had probably done it dozens of times. This was just another job for them, but they weren't expecting what came next. As the flanking forces closed to within 50 yards, the ground beneath them erupted. The ranchers had spent days planting crude explosives along the approach routes, black powder charges triggered by tripwires and pressure plates. The blasts weren't huge, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to disrupt the attack. Men screamed as the charges detonated, throwing bodies into the air, creating chaos in the carefully coordinated assault. In that moment of confusion, the ranchers opened fire. Mara dropped 2 men in quick succession, her rifle shots precise and deadly. Beside her, Rowan was firing with mechanical efficiency, each shot finding its mark. From upstairs, Tom's hunting rifle boomed like a cannon, and through the barn windows, Marcus and Jacob were laying down a withering crossfire. The syndicate advance staggered, wavered, and then broke. The survivors retreated back to their starting positions, dragging wounded with them, leaving dead behind. "Reload! Count your ammunition!" Mara ordered, ejecting spent shells from her rifle. Her hands were steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. They'd beaten back the first assault, but there would be more. Many more. Sarah appeared at her side, face blackened with powder smoke. "We're burning through ammunition faster than expected. If they keep this up, we'll be dry in 3 more engagements. Then we make every shot count." Mara looked at Rowan. "How long can we hold here?" "Depends on Harmon's patience. He could settle in for a siege, starve us out, or he could throw everything at us in one massive push." Rowan studied the enemy positions through a gap in the barricade. My guess? He'll try one more coordinated assault. If that fails, he'll burn us out. Burn us out? Fire arrows, torches, anything that'll light. These buildings are wood and thatch. They'll go up like kindling. Mara's jaw tightened. Then we don't give him the chance. What are you thinking? That defense isn't enough. We need to hit back, keep them off balance, make them react to us instead of the other way around. She turned to face him. Can you slip through their lines? Get around behind them? Rowan's eyes narrowed, considering. Probably. Why? Because while they're focused on the ranch, you could hit their supplies, their ammunition, maybe even take out Harmon if you get the chance. That's suicide. So is sitting here waiting for them to overrun us? Mara held his gaze. You said we need to disrupt them, make them paranoid. What's more disruptive than having their command structure collapse? For a long moment, Rowan didn't speak. Then that cold smile crossed his face. You're learning. I had a good teacher. Flattery won't make this less dangerous. I'm not asking you to be safe. I'm asking you to do what you do best. Rowan checked his weapons, rifle, 2 pistols, knife, and a handful of small explosive charges they'd prepared for emergencies. If I don't make it back, you'll make it back. Mara, you'll make it back because I need you to. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. Because we're not done yet. This valley isn't saved. These people aren't safe, and I'm not ready to lose you. Something shifted in Rowan's expression, some wall coming down for just a moment. When this is over, we'll figure it out. But right now, you need to go. He nodded once, then turned and was gone, slipping through a back exit they'd prepared, vanishing into the landscape like a ghost. Mara watched him disappear, then turned back to her people. Everyone listen up. We're going to be on our own for a while. That means making them work for every inch, every second. Tom, you've got command of the upper floor. Sarah, coordinate the ground level. Marcus, Jacob, hold that barn like your lives depend on it, because they do. The second assault came an hour later, more cautious than the first. The syndicate had learned from their mistakes, weren't rushing into obvious traps. They used suppressing fire to keep the defenders' heads down while advancing in small groups, using every scrap of cover available. It was professional, methodical, and terrifyingly effective. They're going to flank us again, Tom called down. I can see them moving through the tree line. Mara shifted position, firing at targets of opportunity, trying to slow the advance. But there were so many of them, and they just kept coming. For every man she dropped, 2 more took his place. A bullet punched through the wall inches from her head, showering her with splinters. She ducked, moved to a new position, kept firing. This was what Rowan had trained them for, constant movement, never staying in one spot long enough to be targeted. Sarah! Your side! Mara spun to see syndicate men breaching the south wall of the house, pouring through a window they'd shattered with concentrated fire. Sarah met them with her shotgun, the blast deafening in the enclosed space. One man went down, then another, but there were more behind them. Mara charged across the room, her rifle becoming a club as she crashed into the lead attacker. They went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting with desperate violence. She felt his hands on her throat, crushing. And then Sarah was there, dragging the man off, finishing him with a knife. We can't hold them, Sarah gasped, blood streaming from a cut above her eye. There's too many. Fall back to the second floor, now, Mara ordered, helping Sarah to her feet. Everyone upstairs. Abandon the ground level. They scrambled up the narrow staircase as more syndicate men poured into the house. Tom and the others provided covering fire from above, creating a deadly corridor that the attackers had to brave. Bodies piled up on the stairs, but still they came. Mara reached the top and immediately started barricading the stairwell with furniture, anything that would slow the assault. Beside her, Jacob Reeves was firing down into the mass of attackers, his young face twisted with fear and determination. How many? Tom asked, reloading his rifle with practiced speed. Too many. Mara's mind raced, looking for options, finding none. They were trapped on the second floor with dwindling ammunition and an enemy that would eventually wear them down. Then, from somewhere outside came an explosion, and another, and another. The attackers in the stairwell faltered, confusion breaking their momentum. Through the shattered windows, Mara could see chaos erupting in the syndicate's rear positions. Fire and smoke rose from what had to be their ammunition supplies, and men were running, shouting, trying to contain the disaster. Rowan had struck. "Push them back," Mara shouted, seizing the moment. "Everyone fire! Drive them out!" The ranchers unleashed everything they had, pouring fire down the stairwell and out the windows. The syndicate men, already shaken by the explosions behind them, began to retreat. First one, then a handful, then all of them, streaming back out of the house in disorder. Mara didn't let them go easy. She followed them to the windows, firing at the retreating figures, making them pay for every yard. The other ranchers did the same, and the organized assault dissolved into a rout. When the shooting finally stopped, the house was a wreck. The ground floor was full of bodies, blood splattered across the walls, furniture destroyed, but they'd held. "Count off," Mara called. "Who's hit?" "Marcus took one in the leg," Jacob reported. "Bad, but he'll live if we can get the bleeding stopped." "Sarah?" "I'm fine, just bruised." "Tom?" "Still breathing. That's about all I can say for myself." Mara looked around at her battered, exhausted people and felt something fierce and proud rise in her chest. They'd survived. Against overwhelming odds, they'd survived. But the cost was written in their faces, in the trembling hands and thousand-yard stares. This was just one ranch, one battle, and the war was far from over. As if reading her thoughts, Tom spoke quietly. "How many more times can we do this?" Before Mara could answer, Rowan appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd crawled through hell. His clothes were burned, his face blackened with smoke and powder, and he was limping badly. But he was alive. "Their ammunition depot is gone," he reported, leaning against the doorframe. "Took out 3 supply wagons and killed at least 6 men. Harmon's going to have to consolidate his forces, ration what he has left." "Did you get a shot at him?" Mara asked. "Got close, too close. He's got personal guards now, watching every angle. Smart bastard, learned from my first raid." Rowan grimaced, pressing a hand to his side where blood was seeping through his shirt. "But I left him a message. Made sure he knows I'm still coming for him." "You're hurt." "I'm functional." "Rowan, we don't have time for this." He straightened up, pushing through obvious pain. "Harmon's going to regroup and come at us again, but it won't be here. He knows this position is compromised. He'll target one of the other ranches, try to split our forces." "Which one?" "Your ranch. It's the most defensible, the most symbolic. Taking it breaks the resistance psychologically." Rowan looked at each of them in turn. "We need to make a stand there. All of us, together. Turn it into a killing ground they can't overcome." "And if they do overcome it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Then we've lost. But we'll make damn sure they remember the cost." The decision was made in silence, in the exhausted nods and grim acceptance of people who'd already come too far to turn back. They gathered what ammunition they had left, tended to their wounded, and prepared to move. As they worked, Mara pulled Rowan aside, keeping her voice low. "Let me see that wound." "It's nothing." "Show me." He lifted his shirt reluctantly, revealing a deep gash across his ribs, a bullet graze that had taken more flesh than it should have. It was still bleeding, and Mara could see the white of bone through the torn skin. "That's not nothing." She grabbed clean cloth from Sarah's medical supplies and began binding it, her hands gentle despite the urgency. "You need real medical attention." "Add it to the list of things I need and can't have." Rowan watched her work, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this." "Do what?" "Take care of me. Worry about me. I've survived worse on my own." "Maybe I'm tired of you being on your own." Mara tied off the bandage, perhaps tighter than necessary. "Maybe I'm tired of all of us being on our own. That's what the syndicate's counting on, that we'll fracture, turn on each other, go back to being isolated and easy to pick off. And what's the alternative?" "This." She gestured to the battered but standing people around them. "Standing together even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because that's the only way any of us survive." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached up and took her hand, the gesture simple but weighted with meaning. "When this is over, stop saying that. Stop talking like you're already dead. I'm trying to tell you that when this is over, if I'm still breathing, I'd like to..." He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easy. I'd like to stay. Here. With you. Build something instead of just destroying things for once. Mara felt something break open in her chest, something she'd kept locked away for 15 years. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. Then stay alive long enough to keep that promise. They moved out an hour later, a battered column of fighters who looked more like refugees than an army. Marcus had to be helped onto his horse, his leg wrapped in bandages that were already showing red. The others moved with the careful stiffness of people nursing wounds they couldn't afford to acknowledge. The ride to Mara's ranch took 3 hours, every minute of it tense with the expectation of ambush. But the syndicate didn't attack. They were out there. Mara could feel them watching, but they held back, waiting, planning, preparing for the final push. When they reached Mara's property, the sun was already starting its descent toward the western mountains. The ranch looked the same as always. Weathered buildings, sturdy fences, the land she'd fought for every day of the past 15 years. But now it was going to become a battlefield. We've got maybe 6 hours before they move, Rowan said, studying the surrounding terrain. They'll wait for dawn, hit us when we're tired from a night of watching and waiting. Then we use those 6 hours. Mara turned to her people. Every trap we know how to set, we set. Every advantage we can create, we create. And we make them pay for every inch of ground they take. They worked through the evening and into the night, transforming the ranch into a fortress. Tripwires stretched across approaches. Explosive charges buried at choke points. Barricades built from everything they could move. Firing positions prepared in every building, every window, every piece of cover. It was brutal, exhausting work, made harder by injuries and dwindling supplies. But nobody complained. Nobody quit. Because they all understood this was it, the final stand. Win here or lose everything. Sometime after midnight, Mara found herself standing on her porch, looking out at the valley she'd called home for so long. The stars overhead were brilliant, untouched by the violence and blood that had stained the earth below. Beautiful night for it, Tom said, joining her. The old rancher looked ancient in the starlight, worn down by battle and age. Stars don't care about our problems. No, they don't. Been thinking about my father. He died defending this valley from a different kind of threat. Raiders, back in '53. Died on his porch, rifle in hand, protecting what was his. Tom smiled faintly. Guess it runs in the family. We're not dying here, Tom. Some of us will. That's just the truth of it. But maybe that's all right. Maybe there are worse things than dying for land you love, surrounded by people who've become something like family. Mara didn't have an answer for that. Maybe there wasn't one. As dawn approached, the ranchers took their final positions. Sarah on the barn roof with the best vantage point, Tom at an upper window of the main house, Jacob and Marcus, despite his wounded leg, in defensive positions covering the approaches. Others scattered throughout the property, each one placed where they could do the most damage. Rowan stayed with Mara, the two of them positioned where they could move quickly to wherever the fighting was heaviest. They'd be the mobile force, the ones who plugged gaps and turned back breakthroughs. The sun rose slowly, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson. Dawn of the final day. And then they came. The syndicate force appeared on the ridge like a dark tide, more than Mara had ever seen assembled in one place. Harmon had pulled in every man he had, every resource, every weapon. This wasn't a raid or a skirmish. This was an army. Count? Mara asked quietly. Rowan's face was grim. 40. Maybe 45. He's committed everything. Can we win? Honestly? No. But we can make him wish he'd never started this war. Harmon sat his horse at the front, and even at this distance, Mara could see him studying the ranch, calculating angles and approaches. Then he raised his hand, held it for a long moment, and dropped it. The assault began with devastating precision. The syndicate forces split into 3 groups, each targeting a different section of the ranch's defenses. They moved with military discipline, using covering fire and coordinated advances. These weren't thugs or hired guns anymore. These were soldiers fighting a war. The first traps triggered, explosions rippling through the attacking forces. Men screamed, horses bolted, and for a moment the assault faltered. But Harmon was already shouting orders, redirecting his forces, adapting to the defenses. Mara opened fire, her rifle bucking against her shoulder. One shot, two, three. Each one found its mark, but there were always more. The world narrowed to the rhythm of shooting, reloading, shooting again. Beside her, Rowan was a machine, his movements economical and deadly. From the barn, Sarah's rifle spoke in steady thunder. Tom's hunting rifle boomed from the house. Jacob and Marcus laid down crossfire that carved through advancing lines. The syndicate was bleeding, taking horrific casualties, but they kept coming. Because they had to. Because Harmon had committed everything, and retreat wasn't an option anymore. This had become about more than land or profit. This had become about pride, about dominance, about proving that resistance was futile. "They're breaking through on the south!" Jacob's voice cracked with strain. Mara saw it. A wedge of syndicate men had fought their way through the outer defenses, were making for the main house. If they took that, the entire defensive position collapsed. "Rowan, I see it!" He was already moving, racing across the open ground with bullets kicking up dirt around him. Mara followed, terror and determination warring in her chest. They hit the syndicate breakthrough like a hammer, Rowan's knife flashing in the morning light, Mara's rifle butt crushing skulls and breaking bones. It was desperate, savage fighting, the kind where there were no rules and no mercy. A syndicate man grabbed Mara from behind, dragging her down. She twisted, fought, felt his hands crushing her throat. Darkness crept into her vision. Then Rowan was there, his knife sliding between the man's ribs, and she could breathe again. "Stay close," Rowan gasped, pulling her to her feet. "Always." They fought their way back to a defensive position, but the syndicate was everywhere now, overwhelming the defenses through sheer numbers. Buildings burned where fire arrows had found their mark. The barn's roof collapsed, and Mara's heart seized until she saw Sarah scrambling clear, still firing. "Fall back," Mara screamed. "Everyone to the main house. Final defensive position." The ranchers retreated in fighting disorder, abandoning the outer buildings, concentrating in the main house. It was the strongest structure, the most defensible, and it would be their grave if they couldn't hold it. They barricaded the doors and windows, fired from every opening, but the syndicate surrounded them completely. Mara counted heads: Sarah, Tom, Jacob, Marcus, 3 others, Rowan, herself. 9 people against an army, and they were almost out of ammunition. "This is it," Tom said quietly, reloading his rifle with his last shells. "Been an honor, folks." Mara looked at her people, bloodied, exhausted, but unbroken. They'd fought harder than anyone had a right to expect. They'd held longer than seemed possible. And now it was ending. But they were ending it together. She met Rowan's eyes across the room, saw the same thought reflected there. No regrets, no surrender. Just the grim determination to make the syndicate remember this day forever. Outside, Harmon's voice rang out. "Mara Holt, you fought well, but it's over. Surrender now and you have my word. Your people will be allowed to leave." "And you?" Mara shouted back. "What happens to me? You stand trial for the men you've killed, legal and proper." Rowan's laugh was bitter. "He's lying. He'll kill all of you the moment you step outside." "I know." Mara turned back to the window. "We're not surrendering, Harmon. You want this ranch, you come and take it." Silence. Then Harmon's voice again, colder now. "So be it. Burn them out." Torches arced through the air, landing on the roof against the walls. Within minutes, smoke began filling the house. Flames crackled overhead, spreading fast. They had minutes at most before the entire structure became an inferno. "Windows!" Sarah shouted. "We go through the windows and fight our way." The world exploded. But not from fire. From behind the syndicate lines. Gunfire erupted, and Mara saw syndicate men falling, caught in a devastating crossfire from attackers they couldn't see. Through the smoke and chaos, she caught glimpses of new fighters, men in different clothes, moving with purpose through the syndicate forces. "Who?" Jacob started. "The other Valley ranchers," Rowan breathed, understanding dawning on his face. "The ones who wouldn't join us. They've come." And they had. 20 men at least, maybe more, pouring out of the hills and gullies, hitting the syndicate from behind. Not trained fighters, but desperate men who'd seen their neighbors making a stand and couldn't stomach sitting back any longer. The syndicate force, already battered from hours of fighting, couldn't handle the surprise attack. Their formation broke, men scattering, trying to face threats from every direction at once. And in the center of it all, sitting on his horse with blood streaming from a wound in his shoulder, Clay Harmon finally looked like what he was, a man who'd lost. "Now!" Mara screamed, kicking open the burning door. "Everyone out! Hit them while they're broken!" The ranchers poured out of the house in a final desperate charge, not to escape, but to finish what they'd started. They crashed into the disorganized syndicate forces like a wave breaking on rocks, and suddenly the battlefield transformed into 100 individual fights. Mara found herself face to face with Harmon. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with cold fury. He drew his pistol, but Rowan was faster, his shot taking Harmon in the arm and sending the weapon spinning away. "This is between you and me," Rowan said, dismounting and drawing his knife. "Always has been." Harmon slid from his saddle, drawing his own blade. "You should have stayed dead, Cade." "Probably." They circled each other while chaos raged around them, two men with a history of blood settling accounts. When they moved, it was with the speed and skill of professionals. Each strike potentially fatal, each parry perfectly timed. Mara wanted to help, but she couldn't. This was Rowan's fight, his past catching up to him. All she could do was watch and pray he survived it. The fight was brutal and elegant at the same time, two masters of violence testing each other. Harmon was bigger, stronger, with reach advantage. But Rowan was faster, more ruthless, fighting like a man with everything to lose. Blood flowed from a dozen cuts on both men. They grappled, broke apart, circled again. Harmon lunged, his knife seeking Rowan's heart, but Rowan twisted aside and drove his blade up under Harmon's ribs. The big man staggered, looking down at the knife buried in his chest with something like surprise. Then his legs gave out and he fell, blood pooling beneath him. Rowan stood over him, breathing hard, his own blood mixing with his enemy's. "It's done." Harmon's lips moved, trying to form words, but only blood came out. Then he was still. Around them, the fighting was ending. The syndicate forces, their leader dead and their position hopeless, were surrendering or fleeing. The valley ranchers stood among the carnage, battered and bloody but alive, victorious. Mara ran to Rowan, catching him as he swayed. "You did it. It's over." "Not yet." Rowan's voice was weak, and when Mara looked down, she saw the extent of his wounds. Harmon had gotten in more strikes than she'd realized, and Rowan was bleeding from half a dozen places, badly. "Don't you dare," Mara said fiercely, lowering him to the ground. "Don't you dare die on me now, not after everything." "Trying not to," Rowan managed, his smile weak, "but I'm not sure I get a vote." "You get a vote. I'm making sure you get a vote." Mara looked around desperately. "We need a doctor. Someone get a doctor." But there was no doctor. There was just her knowledge of battlefield medicine, and sheer stubborn determination not to let him go. She worked through the day and into the night, cleaning wounds, stitching cuts, fighting to keep him breathing when his lungs filled with fluid. The other ranchers helped where they could, but this was Mara's fight now, and she refused to lose it. Rowan's breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps that tore at something deep in Mara's chest. She'd moved him into what remained of her house. The fire damage had been contained to one wing, leaving the main bedroom intact. Now she knelt beside the bed where she'd laid him, her hands moving with desperate precision as she worked to stop the bleeding from his worst wounds. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing clean cloth against the knife wound below his ribs. The blood kept coming, soaking through layer after layer. "You promised me you'd survive this. You promised." Rowan's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dark with pain. "Didn't promise. Said I'd try. Then try harder." Sarah appeared in the doorway with hot water and more bandages, her face drawn with exhaustion. "How is he?" "Dying." The word came out flat, honest. "Unless I can stop this bleeding." "What do you need?" "A miracle. Or whiskey, preferably both." Tom Dalton arrived minutes later with a bottle of rot gut that probably wasn't fit for human consumption but would have to do. Mara poured it over her hands, over the wounds, ignoring Rowan's sharp intake of breath as the alcohol hit raw flesh. "This is going to hurt," she told him. "Already hurts. It's going to hurt worse." She threaded a needle with steady hands that belied the terror churning in her gut. She'd stitched wounds before, her own, her husband's, livestock injuries that needed closing. But this was different. This was Rowan, and if she failed, if her hand slipped or her stitches didn't hold, he would bleed out before morning. The first stitch made him go rigid, his jaw clenched so tight she thought his teeth might crack. The second brought a low groan that he tried to suppress. By the third, sweat poured down his face, and his hands gripped the sheets with white-knuckled intensity.
"Talk to me," Mara said, needing to keep him conscious, needing to hear his voice. "Tell me about before the syndicate, before all this." Rowan's laugh was more of a gasp. "Not much to tell." "Try anyway." He was quiet for a moment, breathing through the pain as she worked. Then, haltingly, "Had a farm once. Small place. Nothing like your ranch. Just enough land for a family. A life. What happened to it?" "War happened. When I came back, nothing left. Wife had died. Cholera. Baby, too." His voice was distant, lost in memories that still had the power to hurt. "Buried them myself. Then burned the place down and walked away." Mara's hands never stopped moving, stitching, cleaning, binding. But something in her chest cracked open at the raw pain in his words. "I'm sorry. Long time ago, different life, different man. You're still that man, the one who wanted a home, a family. You just forgot for a while." "Maybe." She finished the deep wound and moved to the others, working methodically through the catalog of damage Harmon had inflicted. Each cut, each slice, each puncture told the story of two men who'd known each other's fighting styles intimately, who'd probably trained together once. "He was good," Rowan murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "Better than me in a straight fight. Stronger, faster reflexes. But he fought clean, followed rules, and rules get you killed against someone who won't." "Is that what you are? Someone who won't follow rules?" "I'm someone who survives. Whatever it takes." "Not this time." Mara tied off the last stitch and sat back, surveying her work. It wasn't pretty. Rough battlefield medicine performed by candlelight with inadequate supplies. But it would hold. Maybe. "This time you survive by letting someone else take care of you." Over the next 3 days, Rowan danced on the edge between life and death. Fever set in, inevitable with wounds that severe, and he burned with a heat that seemed impossible for human flesh to contain. Mara stayed by his side, changing bandages, forcing water and broth down his throat when he was conscious enough to swallow, bathing him with cool water when the fever spiked too high. She barely slept, afraid that if she closed her eyes for more than a few minutes, he'd slip away. Sarah and Tom took turns sitting with her, trying to convince her to rest, but she refused. This was her vigil, her responsibility, her choice. On the second night, when the fever was at its worst, Rowan became delirious. He thrashed in the bed, fighting enemies only he could see, calling out names Mara didn't recognize. She held him down as gently as she could, speaking in low, steady tones, trying to anchor him to the present. "It's over, Rowan. The fight's over. You won. Harmon's dead. The syndicate's broken. You can rest now." But he couldn't hear her, lost in whatever private hell the fever had dragged him into. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Can't let them take it. Can't let them win. Have to. You already won. I'm telling you. You won. Now let go and rest." Something in her voice must have penetrated the delirium because his grip loosened and his eyes focused on her face. For just a moment, he seemed to see her clearly. "Mara? I'm here. Don't leave." "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." He slipped back under, but the violence went out of his thrashing. He settled into an uneasy sleep while Mara kept her vigil, her hand wrapped around his. While she fought to keep Rowan alive, the valley began the work of counting its dead and binding its wounds. The battle had left scars that would take years to heal. 6 ranchers had died in the fighting, good people who'd found their courage too late, but had used it well when it mattered. Another dozen were wounded, some seriously. The syndicate had fared worse, 23 men dead on the battlefield, including Harmon.
Another 15 captured or too wounded to flee. The rest had scattered to the winds, abandoning their equipment and supplies in their panic to escape. Tom Dalton took charge of organizing the prisoners and the aftermath, his natural authority asserting itself now that the immediate crisis had passed. He had the syndicate survivors locked in the barn under guard while they figured out what to do with them. "We could hang them," Marcus suggested during one heated discussion. "They killed our people, burned our homes. They deserve it." "And then what?" Sarah countered. "We become the thing we fought against, killing defeated enemies? They wouldn't have shown us mercy, which is exactly why we should show them what they couldn't. We're better than them." Have to be, or what was the point? The debate raged for hours until Tom finally made the decision. "We turn them over to the territorial marshal, the real one, not the bought one. Let the law handle it. We've got enough blood on our hands without adding executions." It was the right choice, even if it didn't feel satisfying. The prisoners were loaded into wagons and shipped to the territorial capital under armed escort. Some would hang, some would see prison. But that would be the law's decision, not the ranchers'. On the fourth day, Rowan's fever broke. Mara woke from a light doze to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. She sat up quickly, reaching for his forehead. Cool. Not cold, not normal, but not burning either. "You're awake. How long?" His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. 4 days? You've been in and out, mostly out. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. "We thought we'd lost you twice. Takes more than Harmon to kill me." "Don't joke. You came too close." Rowan tried to sit up, made it about 3 inches before falling back with a groan. "Syndicate? Broken. Scattered. The ones we didn't kill are in custody." Mara helped him drink water, her hand supporting his head. "It's over, Rowan. We won." He closed his eyes, processing that. "The valley? Still standing. Battered, but standing. People are already talking about rebuilding." "Good. That's good." He drifted off again, but this time it was real sleep, not the fever-induced unconsciousness of before. Mara watched him breathe, watched color slowly return to his face, and allowed herself to believe he might actually survive. A week after the battle, the first territorial officials arrived, not the corrupt ones in the syndicate's pocket, but representatives sent from the capital to investigate reports of a private army operating in the valley. They found a scene of devastation, burned buildings, mass graves, and a story that seemed too incredible to believe. Until the survivors told it. The officials interviewed everyone, examined the evidence, studied the syndicate's confiscated documents. What they found painted a picture of systematic land theft, murder, and corruption that reached higher than anyone had suspected. The Western Territory Syndicate had tentacles throughout the territorial government, bribing officials, intimidating witnesses, and operating with virtual impunity. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated a stubborn woman and the people she'd united. "We're going to need written statements from all of you," the lead investigator told Mara. He was a lean man named Morrison, with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen enough corruption to be perpetually skeptical. Everything that happened, from the first threat to the final battle, names, dates, specific incidents. "You think anyone's going to care?" Mara asked. The syndicate had powerful backers. Had, past tense. Morrison pulled out a newspaper from his satchel, 3 days old. The headline screamed about scandal and arrests in the territorial capital. "Your fight here triggered an investigation. Seems the syndicate kept meticulous records, and some of those records survived. Once we started pulling threads, the whole thing unraveled. Congressmen, judges, business leaders, all connected to the syndicate's operations. All going down." He looked at her with something like respect. "You didn't just save your valley, Miss Holt. You exposed a criminal enterprise that's been bleeding this territory dry for years. People are going to remember that." Mara didn't care about being remembered. She cared about making sure it never happened again. "What about the land? The ranches the syndicate claimed legally?" "Being reviewed. Where we can prove coercion or fraud, the titles will be invalidated and the land returned to the original owners or their heirs. It'll take time, but we're committed to making this right." It wasn't perfect justice, but it was more than Mara had dared hope for. The valley would heal, the dead would be mourned and remembered, and the land they'd fought for would remain in the hands of those who'd bled for it. Rowan recovered slowly, his body healing with the stubborn resistance of someone who'd survived too much to quit now. By the second week, he could sit up unassisted. By the third, he could walk the length of the room without needing to rest. By the fourth, he was demanding to help with the rebuilding efforts, though Mara and Sarah conspired to keep him from overdoing it. "You're worse than a caged wolf," Mara told him one afternoon, watching him pace the porch like a man who'd forgotten how to be still. "I don't like being useless." "You're recovering. That's not useless." "Feels like it." He stopped pacing and looked out at the valley, where smoke rose from cooking fires and the sound of hammers echoed as people rebuilt what the war had destroyed. "They don't need me anymore. The fighting's done." "So you're planning to leave?" The question came out more vulnerable than Mara had intended. Rowan turned to face her, his expression impossible to read. "Do you want me to stay?" It was the question she'd been avoiding asking herself, even as she'd fought to keep him alive, even as she'd sat by his bedside for days. Because wanting something, wanting someone, meant risking the kind of loss she'd sworn never to open herself to again. But she was tired of being safe, tired of being alone, tired of pretending that strength meant never needing anyone. "Yes," she said simply, "I want you to stay." "Why?" "Because you're the best tactical mind I've ever met." She stepped closer to him. "Because you're loyal and brave, and you gave us a fighting chance when no one else would. Because you kept your promise to survive." Another step. "And because somewhere between you killing men in my house and nearly dying in my bed, I started thinking about you as more than just an ally." Rowan's expression softened, some of the armor he wore cracking just enough to let her see the man underneath. "I'm not easy to live with. I have nightmares. I don't talk about things I should. I've spent so long alone I'm not sure I remember how to be part of something." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. I don't have anything to offer you. No money, no property, nothing but a past full of violence and mistakes." "I don't care about money or property. I care about having someone who understands what we fought for, what we built." She closed the distance between them, her voice dropping. "I care about not being alone anymore. And I think maybe you care about that too." For a long moment, Rowan just looked at her. Then he reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses on her palm, the marks of 15 years of hard work and harder choices. "I do," he said quietly. "I care about that more than I thought I could care about anything. Then stay. Help me rebuild. Help me turn this ranch into something more than just a fortress. Help me prove that we didn't survive just to go back to being isolated and afraid." "What are you asking me, Mara?" "I'm asking you to be my partner. Not just in fighting, but in building, in living, in whatever comes next." Rowan pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. "I'm not the man I was before all this. The war, the syndicate, everything I've done. It changed me. Some of those changes aren't good. I'm not the woman I was either. We'll be changed people together." He kissed her then, and it wasn't gentle or romantic or anything like the story suggested. It was fierce and desperate, two people who'd survived hell reaching for something that felt like hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "I'll stay," he said, "as long as you'll have me." "Good. Because the barn needs rebuilding and I could use someone who knows their way around structural engineering." His laugh was surprised and genuine. "Romantic." "I'm a rancher, not a poet. You want romance, you picked the wrong woman." "No." He kissed her again, softer this time. "I picked exactly right." The valley rebuilt through the summer and into autumn. The ranchers who'd survived the battle worked together in ways they never had before, helping each other raise barns, mend fences, and restore what the war had destroyed. The divisions that had kept them isolated for so long had been burned away in the crucible of shared struggle. New families moved into the empty ranches, drawn by stories of the valley that had stood against impossible odds and won. Some were former soldiers looking for peace. Others were settlers seeking land they could afford. All of them were welcomed by the existing community, taught the lessons that had been learned in blood about the importance of standing together. Sarah Chen married Jacob Reeves in a simple ceremony that fall. Two people who'd found each other in the chaos of war and decided they wanted to face peace together. Tom Dalton, despite his protests that he was too old and ornery, found himself elected as the Valley's unofficial leader, coordinating efforts and mediating disputes with the gruff wisdom of someone who'd seen the worst and still believed in the best. Marcus Webb recovered from his leg wound, though he'd walk with a limp for the rest of his life. He wore it like a badge of honor, telling anyone who'd listen about the battle where farmers had beaten a private army. The stories grew in the telling, becoming legend, but the core truth remained unchanged. The Valley had survived, and it had survived together. Mara and Rowan rebuilt her ranch through the seasons, working side by side from dawn until dusk. They argued about everything: the best way to frame a wall, where to position the new barn, how many cattle the land could support. But the arguments never felt like the distance she'd kept between herself and everyone else for so long. They felt like the normal friction of two strong-willed people learning to move in tandem. One evening in late autumn, they sat on the newly rebuilt porch watching the sun set over the valley. The air carried the scent of coming winter, and smoke rose from chimneys across the landscape. "You ever regret it?" Rowan asked quietly. "Fighting instead of selling? All those people who died might still be alive if you'd just taken the money and left." Mara considered the question seriously because it deserved serious consideration. People had died. That weight would never completely lift. But she also thought about what they'd built in the aftermath, about the community that had formed from shared struggle. "I regret the deaths," she said finally. "Every single one. I'll carry those names with me until I die. But I don't regret the fight. Because if we'd surrendered, if we'd just let them take what they wanted, what would we have become? People who ran when things got hard. People who traded principles for comfort. And that lesson would have spread beyond this valley. Every other place the syndicate targeted would have known that resistance was futile." "So you fought to set an example?" "I fought because it was right. The example was just a side effect." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "And look what we built because of it. People help each other now, trust each other. They're not just neighbors anymore, they're a community. That's worth the scars." Rowan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You're a better person than me. I just wanted revenge." "And did you get it?" "Yeah, Harmon's dead, the syndicate's destroyed. I got everything I wanted." He paused. "And then I got something I didn't know I needed." "What's that?" "A reason to keep living instead of just surviving." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. In the distance, Mara could see lights in the windows of other ranches, could imagine the families gathering for evening meals, the children being put to bed, the normal rhythms of life continuing. "I want to ask you something," Rowan said eventually. "Ask." "Marry me." Mara turned to look at him, surprised not by the question itself but by the timing. "That's not very romantic either. Told you I'm not good at this. Should I get down on one knee? Make a speech?" "You should tell me why." "Because I love you." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Because I want to spend whatever time I have left building something with you instead of tearing things down. Because when I nearly died, the last thing I remember thinking was that I wished I'd told you how I felt. Because you're stubborn and fierce and the strongest person I've ever known, and I don't want to imagine my life without you in it." Mara felt tears prick her eyes, stupid, sentimental tears that she tried to blink away. "I'm not easy to live with either. I'm controlling and I don't like being told what to do, and I've got my own nightmares." "I know, that's why we'll work. We're both too stubborn to quit on each other." "Is that a proposal or a tactical assessment?" "Both." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple ring made from twisted wire, clearly handmade. "It's not much. When we get to town, I'll buy you something proper. But I wanted to ask now before I lost my nerve." Mara took the ring, turning it over in her fingers. It was rough and imperfect and absolutely perfect. She slipped it onto her finger, feeling the weight of it settle like a promise. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Rowan kissed her again, and this time it was gentle, sweet, full of the future they were choosing together. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. "When?" he asked. "Spring. Give us time to finish rebuilding. Give the valley time to heal properly."
She looked out at the land they'd fought for, the home they were creating. I want to get married here, on this porch, with everyone watching. I want them to see that something good came from all the pain. A public declaration? A celebration. For everyone who survived, everyone who fought. She squeezed his hand. And a promise that the valley has a future worth celebrating. Winter came hard that year, but the valley was ready for it. Supplies had been stockpiled, buildings winterized, and the community had developed systems for checking on each other during the worst storms. When the snows came, they came together, no one left to face the cold alone. Mara and Rowan spent the long winter evenings planning their future. They talked about expanding the ranch, maybe hiring hands come spring. They discussed what crops might grow well in the valley's soil, what improvements could be made to irrigation systems. They argued about whether to get chickens or focus on cattle, about the merits of different breeds of horses, about 1,000 small decisions that added up to a life. But they also talked about bigger things, about the responsibility they felt to the valley and its people, about how to ensure that what they'd built together wouldn't fall apart when the generation that had fought for it was gone, about creating something that would last. "We should start a school," Mara said one night, watching firelight play across the ceiling. "Proper one, with a real teacher. So the children who grow up here don't have to leave to get educated." "You planning on filling that school with our children?" Rowan asked, his tone carefully neutral. It was a question they danced around for months. Mara was 42, not young for starting a family, and both of them carried enough scars, physical and otherwise, that the idea of bringing children into their lives felt complicated. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe. If it happens, it happens. But I'd want them to grow up in a place where they can be whoever they want to be. Where a girl can run a ranch if that's her calling, or a boy can be a teacher if that's his. Where they're not limited by what everyone thinks they should be." "Sounds like you're describing the valley we're building." "Exactly." She rolled over to face him. "That's the real victory, isn't it? Not just surviving, but creating something worth having survived for. Something that makes all the pain mean something." "You're getting philosophical in your old age." "I'm not old." "Didn't say you were." He pulled her closer. "But you're definitely getting soft." The Mara Holt who refused to talk to her neighbors for 15 years wouldn't recognize the woman planning community schools. Maybe that Mara Holt needed to die so this one could live. "I like this one better." "Good. Because she's not going anywhere." Spring arrived with the rush and tumble of snowmelt, turning the valley green almost overnight. The ranchers emerged from winter quarters and immediately began the work of planting, calving, and continuing the rebuilding that winter had interrupted. The valley hummed with activity and purpose. And on a bright morning in May, with wildflowers blooming across the hills and the whole valley gathered to witness, Mara Holt and Rowan Cade stood on the porch of her rebuilt ranch house and made promises to each other. Tom Dalton officiated, reading from a book of common law with his reading glasses perched on his nose and his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Sarah Chen and Jacob Reeves stood as witnesses. Marcus Webb played a fiddle he'd learned from his grandfather. Children ran between the legs of adults, their laughter a reminder of why they'd all fought so hard. "Do you, Mara Holt, take this man to be your husband, to stand with him in times of trouble and times of peace, to build a life together on this land you fought for?" "I do." "And do you, Rowan Cade, take this woman to be your wife, to stand with her in times of trouble and times of peace, to build a life together on this land you fought for?" "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by people who don't really have the authority to vest it, I pronounce you husband and wife. Kiss her before she changes her mind." Rowan did, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like idiots. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. There was food and music and dancing, stories told and retold about the battle and the rebuilding, toasts raised to the fallen and to the future. It was exactly what Mara had wanted. Not just a wedding, but a reminder to everyone that joy could follow pain, that community could rise from conflict, that there was always a reason to keep fighting for tomorrow. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them, Mara and Rowan slipped away to the edge of the gathering, standing where they could see both the celebration and the valley beyond. "Think it'll last?" Rowan asked quietly. "Everything we've built?"
I think we'll do everything we can to make sure it does. And we'll teach the people who come after us to do the same. Mara leaned against him, feeling the solid reality of his presence, the weight of the ring on her finger, the future stretching out before them. Nothing's permanent, but some things are worth fighting to preserve. We proved that. We did, didn't we? Yeah, we really did. They stood there as the stars came out overhead, watching their people celebrate, watching the valley settle into evening peace. The scars would always be there, the graves on the hillside, the rebuilt buildings that would never quite match the originals, the nightmares that still came sometimes in the dark. But so would the victories, the community they'd forged, the home they'd defended, the future they'd chosen together. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the night. The sound that had once meant danger and isolation now just meant the valley was alive, wild, and free, just as they'd fought to keep it. Mara squeezed Rowan's hand, feeling him squeeze back. Two people who'd come to each other through violence and blood, who'd learned to trust when trust had nearly killed them, who'd chosen to stand together when standing alone had been easier. They weren't perfect. The valley wasn't perfect. But it was theirs, built with their hands and defended with their blood, and that made it worth every scar. Come on, Mara said finally, pulling him back toward the party. We've got a celebration to get back to, and tomorrow we've got a ranch to run. Together. Always together. They walked back into the light and the music and the laughter. Two people who'd survived the impossible and found something worth surviving for. Behind them, the valley stretched out under the stars, quiet and peaceful and home. The woman no one could break had finally found something stronger than her stubbornness, stronger than her pride, stronger than her fear of being vulnerable. She'd found a partner who understood that the strongest bond wasn't control or protection or even love standing alone. It was choosing to ride side by side through fire, through loss, and into whatever came next. And that was a choice they'd make every day for the rest of their lives.